any action that we're doing that is benefiting us in some way that we're doing on a regular basis, whether we create energy to do that or not, is maybe discipline then.
You might sometimes need discipline with willpower. So if you've never, using your running example, a lot of people do couch to 5K, right? Whatever they want to do, and they've never ran before. They know the benefits are out there, but actually they really don't want to do it. So they have to use huge amounts of willpower because they know the reward will come later. So it's they have to resist temptation to get there. That's what willpower is for me. The temptation would be to stay sat on the sofa and not go and do it. But actually, you need willpower to get off because you know the reward will come. But you've got to put the work in. Now, of course, you've got to be disciplined with that work or the results will never come. Yeah. One won't make the change. You've got to do it daily, weekly, whatever.
Welcome to the Mindful Paths podcast with Nick Day and Hari Kalymnios, where we explore the fascinating worlds of mindset, mindfulness, fitness, well-being, vitality, leadership, and personal development.
Our goal is to provide you with the insights to help you live a more fulfilling, happier, and healthier life.
If you're striving to be a better parent, friend, leader, colleague, or boss, or if you simply want to be more mindful and aware of the world around you, then this Mindful Paths podcast is for you.
We invite you all to eavesdrop on our conversations, and we challenge you to discover a new insight to help you on your own journey towards personal growth and positive change.
So sit back,
relax, and let's begin our journey together
on the Mindful Paths podcast. Welcome back to the UK, Nick. I saw that you were gallivanting around in America last week.
I have, mate. To be honest, I've just finished a book called Energized by Simon Ong on the plane back from Denver. Really good. Although slightly ironic because I'm severely jet lagged, struggling with my sleep. People don't know me anymore. I struggle with insomnia for, probably over 20 years. So, on medication for it, as much as I've tried all the different tools and techniques. I don't have to take it daily, which is good. Coming back has been a real battle in getting my sleep back in. So I've got big bags. If I was watching on video, I've got big bags under my eyes, and I'm trying to get back into an ordinary sleep routine. So I want to come bring in the energy today, and I think I will. I'm trying to dive into all the different pots that Simon Ong talks about in his book Energize and the things we've talked about on the show. But probably a little bit lower on the energy than I would like to be at the moment.
Well, that's okay. I mean, what was the time difference between where you were? It was Denver somewhere, wasn't it? Colorado.
Yes, I think that was seven hours.
Yeah, so 7 hours approximately. It's going to take 7 days. Like I always tell people, it's an hour. It's a day per hour, effectively.
Well, I didn't sleep on the plane on the way back, which most people do. It was a night flight, so we left at 12. We arrived effectively at 12, thereabouts, and I didn't sleep on the plane. So you then have to you're up for 24 hours, and you got to wait another 10 hours till it's bedtime. So you're sort of 34, 36 hours without sleep. Then you go to bed and I didn't really sleep well the first night. It was like 3 or 4 hours. So it's best part of, I don't know, 52 hours, and I've had about 3 hours sleep. So it takes, I can deal with like lack of sleep better than most because as an insomniac, I'm quite used to being underslept compared to others, but I think it's a little bit more than usual. So you feel a little bit, especially if you're staring at a computer screen all day doing Zoom interviews, at the end of it, you're just a bit like warped out. So yeah.
I mean, my recommendation with jet lag is tough. Firstly, from going from west to east, so flying east, which is what you're doing, is always hard. Like flying the other way is easy. Flying back is always hard. But like, I'm sure you know all the things, right? Get the morning sunlight when you can. Get yourself back on the grass if you can. Get yourself in the sea if you can. Like anything like that.
10 hours on a plane. Positive news. I managed to read cover to cover Man's Search for Meaning, which I really enjoyed, and picked out some snippets from that. I read Energized by Simon Ong cover to cover. So very rare you get sort of 10 hours solid to yourself to read. I mean, you watch a couple of movies as well, and you kind of keep yourself occupied. But these are kind of things on your list you can tick off quite quickly. So I feel like I've been pretty productive, which is good. And I was quite focused on what I wanted to achieve while I was on the plane. So I kind of, for someone who's not that organized, was pretty organized. I brought the books with me, got them all out, laid them out, knew what I was going to read on route, what I wanted to achieve by the time I got back, and really happily managed to do what I wanted to do. So from that perspective, I feel like I've been pretty productive.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good. I guess it kind of lends into a little bit of what I thought we'd talk about, and whether I guess it ties in or not with the idea of like discipline, because I feel like you were quite disciplined there on the plane, books instead of movies and things like that. Whereas I used to be a bit better with the books and the reading, and then recently in the last couple of years, I'm sure I've been more of a download my movies onto my phone and watch movies now. But
I think that's what most of my
find,
colleagues did, to be fair, that came out with me. They had everything on their iPads. And
I actually find that really tiring though, actually on a plane watching movies. I find I struggle a bit with it. Especially with the screens that they provide, because they're too big and too much in my face. And actually prefer my phone. But yeah, I thought maybe like willpower, discipline, but also because I've just been having a conversation with my mentees, all these teenagers that I mentor around the world, and we were talking.
I haven't actually asked you what you've been up to. Sorry, that was really rude of me. I've told you about. I didn't even tell you what I've done. I told you about my flight and my jet lag. But yeah, what have you been up to for the last?
Honestly, not very interesting. Just work, running lots of workshops. Had quite a busy week last week. I think I did four workshops, which were in all schools, and they were pretty tough-ish days, if I'm honest. For one reason or another, like maybe it was a behavior thing. Another one, it wasn't behavior, but it was the energy of the group just needed so much input. And running about in the evenings doing stuff. And actually, what I have been doing a lot of recently, which I've been really enjoying, and I did today after teaching, is I've just been using. I think we've talked about this before, but I've just been using the sauna and the steam room a lot more.
Yeah, nice.
And I've been missing it because I used to use it all the time in Finsbury Park when I used to live around there because it was really close. Now there isn't one in the gym that I go to locally, but there is one on the way home if I travel through London. So whenever I travel through London, I stop off in Highbury and use the one there. And I felt that my body feels, I think, like 10 years younger at the moment. I was in yoga the other day and I was moving in a way that I haven't felt for a while. And I think because the only real difference is the steam and the sauna. I haven't really changed much in my other routine. And I think it's that.
We've been the opposites. And I went to a massive Gaylord Conference Centre near Denver Airport. And the pool, I was really excited, packed all my swim stuff. You know, I'm in training for Ironman 70.3 Stafford coming up. I thought I'll get my swimming in, get my running in, use the gym. Got there and the swimming pool was closed because apparently one of the air conditioning tubes had fallen whilst people were swimming and landed in the pool. I think 6 people ended up in hospital. So the pool was completely closed. I'm sure there'll be a massive legal suit as well chasing that down. So we couldn't get in the pool, which was gutted. Massive conference centre. We ended up hotel bound and literally there's nothing around. So there's the hotel and then just barren wasteland. So couldn't really go anywhere. I did go for a run, but it was the most like dull, straight lined run, just following the streets around, coming back. And then it was just like you're in hotel food, which is fine, but I'm not that disciplined, so definitely overconsumption. So for fitness side and well-being side, lack of sleep, not the best diet at all. Couldn't swim, so I was a bit gutted about that. But have been productive on the work side. I think I recorded 20 or maybe 22 podcasts during the 4 days I was there, because that's why I was there. I was there as a media partner, so I was just like podcast, all about speaking payroll, speaking HR, speaking all the things in the world that I work in. So it's been pretty taxing. And I came back and thought, right, I'll get on it now. Saturday, Sunday, I'll hit my beautiful weather. I'll get on my bike. And I woke up and I was like, I can't do it. Just can't face it. I was like, I'm too tired. Can't get one. In beautiful weather, I've been absolutely rubbish. So now I'm feeling like that. The guilt that I haven't quite done what I should have done. Because usually I've got the willpower, which we were talking about earlier, to get out and do it regardless of the situation. But this weekend, it's probably the first weekend in a long time, I've literally done very, very little.
I mean, I guess this is a good point to start the kind of main topic, really, because I do feel like, you are someone that is really good generally with exercising. I feel like that's a strength, but I feel like a lot of people, and this is something I keep trying to teach them, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, but they always think, I'd love to get out and exercise and do this and do that or stick to a diet, but I don't have the willpower or I don't have the discipline. And I'm often told by my friends, you're so disciplined. And you probably think I'm quite disciplined as well. And I don't feel I am. And I don't feel it's to do with willpower or discipline. And I'm not, there's contention around the studies around willpower. For years, they were saying willpower is a finite resource, and then you can recharge it with sleep and you can recharge it with food. And then recently, it was like it wasn't really about being a finite resource. I think the whole talk about it's irrelevant to some degree anyway. Willpower and discipline, and the reason I feel like it is because ultimately those things don't create the consistency. In my view, they're kind of good to get you going. They don't ultimately change things in the long term. My changes that I felt I did 12, 13 years ago when we met, and then I made some changes. did not, I believe, come from discipline. Because if I had to be disciplined in my eating, which most people think I'm very disciplined in my eating, I think I'd find that a real struggle, and it would wane, and I would have given up after 6 months or a year, because to be disciplined at something requires effort, a lot of effort, and we have to put energy into that effort. Whereas what I think it is more to do with is really two things. One, it's habits and routines.
Yeah.
And two, it is to do with identity and self-image. And I think that's what ultimately changed for me. And that how I saw myself shifted. Like, I see myself, for example, as like someone who's always good at exercise, regular exercise. That's part of my identity. Ever since I was 8 years old, I was going to judo and then other martial arts and football and everything. And so it's wrapped into who I am as a person. So for me, but I will say it's still an effort to exercise, right? But it's still part of my identity.
I think it's quite interesting that you wrap up willpower. I don't think I'd ever considered wrapping up willpower with discipline as two things that necessarily go together. I guess they do, because willpower involves self-control. Naturally, they're not. It's not a term I'd have grouped with willpower. So, but you mentioned then, like, you did sport from a young age. But that's almost also, if you were to link the two, it's part of the way you were nurtured, and in the way you would have been disciplined in the way that you were parented to get you into that. So for you to form that level of identity in the first place, right? Certainly for me, my dad took me to football every single week without failure. I wouldn't see much from during the week. He works on a farm. Saturday was our day. We'd go to football every single week. Sit from the age of God 4 all the way through to 18. I don't think he ever missed a game. And that was discipline. That was my time with my dad, and that was time when I played sport. So I guess there's discipline in that. I can't remember, though, linking that to willpower. That was just something we did. Yeah. I don't know if they necessarily always have to be interlinked. Maybe they do.
I don't know if they always have to be interlinked, but I mean, I will say that for me, it wasn't that it was driven by an external factor. Like, my parents didn't, I mean, they took me to swimming when I was younger and judo at the beginning, but it wasn't that they were insisting on these things. And I was in my family, the one who was more into sports than my two siblings. And so I felt like, for me, it just became, and this is when I remember it, and I remember this distinctly. There's a few moments in my life where I feel like I've made a decision. And I always heard about Tony Robbins would talk about the word decision means decaire or something from Latin to cut away. And then when you make a decision, you cut away from all other possibility, and it's suddenly there. And I think there's a couple of times in my life where I can remember making a decision where it was so strong that there was no other path that I was going to go down. And the first time, not the first time, but the recent time, which was probably 11 years ago, and I came out of the Tony Robbins event, UPW, which I'm seeing advertised on the Tube actually at the moment, and he's in Birmingham this year. And I went in 2012, and I've been a fan of Tony Robbins for about 6 years prior to that, listened to pretty much every audio that he's ever done. Yeah. And I didn't feel that when I was in the event that it was particularly life-changing for me personally. And I've done lots of life-changing things. And what I realized is that about 6 months after the event itself, I suddenly am doing something where I tie it back to that point and think, that has made a change in my life. And so for the Tony Robbins thing, what I realized about 6 months after the Tony Robbins was that as soon as I came out of Tony Robbins, I went and bought my first juicer. And I didn't tie the two together until much later. But I remember being in my kitchen with the juicer the first time that I was using it. In that moment, I made a decision that every day I'm going to juice. And every day for the next 3 years, I did.
I want to sit here because I want to make sure that I understand whether you and I define it this. I think it's really interesting. This is like you and me being out, like this is what we're talking about in the pub, because we probably got different definitions of what this means. What it appears to me that we do. So using your decision, and by the way, Tony Robbins is great, and everything you've said makes sense. And this isn't to disagree, but the reason I don't think, for me, I associate discipline with willpower. Discipline, like when you make a decision, typically gives you instant gratification. So I'll be disciplined. I'll make my bed in the morning. I don't particularly want to do it, but I'll do it now because it's just something that I'll do because it's an instant thing. And it may be the same. Maybe maybe my issue is more contextualization of time, right? But I would consider willpower to be something that we consciously decide what we want to do when we want to do it, the thing we decide to do involves resisting temptation. So if you're pushing off a reward and getting that reward later on. So if you're doing willpower, in my context of doing an Ironman race, when I'm doing a 4 hours into a 5-hour ride and I'm really struggling, I could stop now. I could make a decision and I could stop. Right? I've done all the discipline work's been done. I've done the work to get there, but actually it's the willpower that keeps me going. It's the resisting the temptation to stop, knowing the reward will come later if I push on and through. I would be more associated with willpower with resilience than I would with discipline. From my perspective, in the way that I do things, I would say it was more closely aligned with the word resilience, of just keep going when everything else is telling you to stop. That doesn't have to be in the world of athletics and sports, just where I can think about it. It's like willpower, not eating that donut, right? So I understand why that could also be discipline for a greater goal. But for me, it in my brain, that would be more associated with willpower, because I really want it now, but I'm going to go no, because my bigger goal is getting to Ironman. And maybe I'm agreeing with you as I'm talking out loud. I don't know, but I just think
a few distinctions. Yeah. So let me separate the explanation I was given from willpower and discipline, because the decision part, and the reason I mentioned the decision both in that moment to make the juice, is that decision created in me a new identity of who I was going to be. And therefore, it's not discipline that gets me to do the juicing or willpower. It is what it is. It is like brushing my teeth. It is like doing anything else that you do. And the same thing happened when it came to exercise, because I remember being in Athens when I was around 7 years old. And I remember this so distinctly because I was wearing this white singlet thing that my mum had bought me. And we went to the old stadium where the Olympics were first held in 1896, I believe it was, or the first modern Olympics. I think it was that one, or maybe it was the old Olympics from 1000. Either way, it was this old site. And I remember we went for a run with my 2 sisters and my mum. I don't think it was my dad. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm gonna win, right? I'm gonna beat them. And I remember when I finished that race, suddenly something changed internally inside of me, where I decided that physical exercise was going to be part of my identity. And I remember feeling a distinct change at the time. And they're the only 2 times I think in my life that I can come up with now, where I made a choice or a decision, and I've noticed there's been a fundamental shift in who I identify as. And the reason I bring that up is because that identity shift created a different set of habits and routines, which didn't require discipline and don't require. So discipline, I guess, is doing the thing that you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, whether you want to do it or not. Willpower is somewhat similar. However, I see from your example where you're saying, let's say you're at mile 23 of a 26.1 or 26.2 marathon, and it's that willpower that is going to get you to the finish, because you're willing yourself, you're striving for that short-term pain for that long-term gain. But
everything's telling you to stop. I think that's where the definition differs for me on disciplines, because for you, in your example, and we won't go around in circles here, so apologies. I'm just trying to get my head.
Yeah, go for it.
So the juicing, you say, is part of your identity, and I get that. So the things that you value, and you talked about with me on the show and beyond, is things like security, vitality, energy, health, right? So for you, it's part of your identity to juice every day. However, you still need to be disciplined to many times we come onto this show, you said, I've just juiced, I've just prepared this for tomorrow. For me, they're all things that are maybe part of your identity, but they're disciplined actions to do. I think just like, I have to drink water every day, but I have to be disciplined to make sure I do drink it, or I won't, but I don't like it. So for me, that's because you want the outcome. There's no willpower involved in that at all, because it's an outcome it's part of your identity. It's part of who you want to be. There's nothing in you saying you don't want to do this. So for me, that's why I don't see the distinction being with willpower. Willpower usually is when you don't want to do something, but I juice every day. I don't, but if I did, that would need a lot of discipline and willpower for me, because I wouldn't really want to do it. I'd be like, such a hassle. I've got to get the kids ready for school. It goes against, I'm going to be late for this. It's going to delay my training. So I would need willpower. I need to understand the reward would have to be great enough for me to want to do the work to make that happen. I'll have to have those things all have to be combined. I'd have to be, so therefore I would need willpower to do that. But I still think it's, in your instance, it's disciplined whether you would do it or not, because it's a regular thing. And maybe I'm thinking of it in army terms, or it's just I have that association with doing it every single day.
Yes, it's like if I ask you, do you feel like you're being disciplined brushing your teeth twice a day or having a shower every day? And
yes.
Other people might think they are, for
Yeah, I
that.
would. I'm just like in the army, making your bed every day.
So,
We'd associate that with being disciplined. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess in that regard, then you could call it discipline, because if we shower every day or we brush our teeth every day or any action that we are doing that is benefiting us in some way that we're doing on a regular basis, whether we create energy to do that or not is maybe discipline then.
You might sometimes need discipline with willpower. So if you've never, using your running example, a lot of people do couch to 5K, right? Whatever they want to do, and they've never ran before. They know the benefits are out there, but actually they really don't want to do it. So they have to have huge amounts of willpower because they know the reward will come later. So it's they have to resist temptation to get there. That's what willpower is for me. The temptation would be to stay sat on the sofa and not go and do it. But actually, you need willpower to get off because you know the reward will come. You've got to put the work in. Now, of course, you've got to be disciplined with that work or the results will never come because one won't make the change. You've got to do it daily or weekly, whatever. But I think for me, it's when everything's telling you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway.
Well, that for me is, yes, that's the willpower, and the willpower's the catalyst. I also feel like in some way that's the discipline as well, because a lot of the things that I do, I don't want to do them anyway. Like I didn't really want to have to prep my veg for tomorrow morning and my 6 a.m. start if I didn't have to do it. I would rather not do it. I guess it's like a Venn diagram, willpower and discipline for me, in that there's overlapping. For me, the point I'm trying to make is maybe the difference is the discipline can be a consistent thing, whereas the willpower, in my view, is short-lived. But I guess my point I'm trying to make is that when you make a decision about something, right, where it's you're going to walk every day, you're going to juice every day, yeah, it might seem like discipline to the outside person, but only in as much as someone who doesn't brush their teeth, seeing someone brush their teeth every day, they're saying, oh, they're so disciplined, they're brushing their teeth every day. And actually, I guess when we're younger and our parents are making us brush our teeth every day, they're instilling that discipline into us.
The thing I'm really interested in with you using your research in particular, because I'm a big believer that you can train your willpower. Not everyone that it's not just an innate thing that's sat there with a limited amount of control. I think if you put the work in, it's something that it's kind of if you were to align it with a muscle, I think it's something that can be developed. I'd be keen to know from your side, because you've done a lot of research into this and whatever. What's your view on willpower? Is it something that do we all have the same level? And if are we born with the same levels? Can we change our levels? Can we improve our levels? I would argue, maybe arrogantly, I don't mean to, that in certain instances, my willpower is much stronger than others. But then when I'm talking about it in terms of the sporting context, and yet from you, but you probably associate with identity, I don't have the willpower to change my diet to the level that you have, or to change my surrounds in the evening like you do. Is that even willpower? I don't know.
I think, something about willpower that I think it's very much tied into your self-talk, because let's say we're both, this is why I asked you probably on episode 1 or 2, that when you're on your cycle trips with me and we're both going up those steep hills, what are you thinking to yourself? What are you saying to yourself? And you were saying you're just trying to beat the time before, you're looking at numbers and times and things. Whereas, I'm saying, getting stronger, getting faster, or a lot of the time what I used to be saying is, damn, this is hard. I don't think I can't keep up with him. I'm not as fit. I should have done more training, and so on. And that determines the willpower as well, how you talk to yourself. Because if you're saying, I can do this, just 1 more mile, this is easy, that's going to create a stronger willpower. So I think your willpower is intrinsically linked into your self-talk. And so depending on how you might naturally be in terms of a self-talk way, and that can be changed, will determine your level of willpower in a specific.
So as a question, not sure I know how to do this, so I'm thinking out loud, right?
Yeah.
How would you define the differences between, because everything you've said and everything I've said, I'm thinking, what is the difference between willpower and resilience? Because I think I just described resilience. That's just self-talk. That's when you want to give up, you want to keep going, not giving up too soon. I think the only real difference for me between the two, and you may disagree, I hadn't thought about this till it kind of popped up when I associated the words earlier, is usually willpower for me would involve a reward later on, whereas to be resilient, there isn't always, well, maybe there is. You kind of just have to keep going sometimes. Yeah. It's like, keep calm and carry on is a bit more resilient. But I guess the reward is the ability to carry on. But maybe with willpower, there's a physical or a mental effort to achieve something. So you push differently. But how does it differ for you?
I think for me, resilience is 2 things. So most people think about resilience in one way. And often when I hear about people talking about resilience, it's about being knocked down and the ability to bounce back and get back from a setback. I agree with that. And I also think that resilience is about not being able to get knocked down in the first place. So what I mean by that is, if I wanted to build a more resilient body, for example, and I'm eating well, because I don't want to have the seasonal flu or the seasonal cold that other people might get. So therefore, I'm more resilient. So I've not been knocked down in the first place, as opposed to I've been knocked down with something and I'm bouncing back quicker. So for me,
building a resilient body in that instance.
Yeah. So for me, resilience is more about A, ability to get knocked down and bounce back, and B, the ability not to get knocked down in the first place. Willpower is the ability for me to strive towards a goal when I guess the odds are against me and I don't feel like carrying on. Discipline is doing the thing that I need to do at the time I need to do it, whether I want to do it or not. Okay. I guess those three things.
I'll sound like a really bad parent now. True story. Some people already know this, and they're listening, because some people have asked to see the presentation, which I haven't shared. But I asked my son. He's a sensitive boy. Love him to bits. Of course I do. And he was having a few issues at school, and he's just picked up football and different things. But we were playing tennis this one time, and I think a kid hit a tennis ball at him. It kind of hit him. He was desperate for me to notice it hit him, and he was. I don't think my personal view is it didn't particularly hurt, but he was really keen for me to notice it. And then when I did notice it, of course, the tears come. They always come after the dad spotted it. And we were in the car afterwards, and I went, it'd be worth you trying to be more resilient to these things there, because you will get hit now and again, and these things will happen. And as you say, it's how we bounce back. And there's nothing wrong with crying. That's okay, but you still need to carry on. You shouldn't finish your session, right? You're okay. You're physically okay, and it's one of these things. So we agreed that he would create a presentation on resilience. There was some pocket money involved if he did this for us. And it was really good. He created a presentation talking about plants, and we'd worked through it together anyway, so I knew where it was going. It was really interesting. If you think about how plants grow, the resilience of plants can be, you can put them in a soil where there's no shade, and some just won't make it. They'll where there's too much shade, and they won't grow because they can't find the sun. And then you'll find other plants which are able to kind of creep around, and then they find a bit of sun, they creep around something else, and they move. And even where there's no sunlight, even where the soil is poor, there's no water, in the desert, whatever. This whole thing about the resilient plants are the ones that always seem to find a way. They snake through, and they I don't know, they're able to find water, they're able to find sunlight, and they're able to survive in the harshest of conditions. I was like, yes, that's not about being, knocked down by the fact you haven't got sun. Well, let's go find some sun. Oh, I've got no water. Let's go find some water. Let's go find the fertile soil. And the resilient ones are the ones that survive. Yeah. And I think it's been a really positive experience for both of us, actually, but to work through it as a parent and son experience, but also for him to understand what it is. And we went running the other day, which is why I mentioned it. We go bowling sometimes on a Tuesday, and then we go for a little run down the coast afterwards with my son and my daughter. And he was really struggling. But for whatever reason, usually run that distance regularly. But this particular time, he was struggling. But he was saying to me, "I'm going to be resilient, Dad. I'm going to get to the end, because I'm going to keep." The resilience is about keep going even when you're tired. And it was good, because he did keep going. Good. He did make it there. It was like, that was something to be celebrated. There's a little bit of willpower in there as well, because he really wanted to stop.
Yeah,
it was a good exercise.
I like the definition he gave there. I mean, we could call it resourcefulness as well, but I like the way you said "find a way." Right? The plants find a way. And maybe that actually, works quite nicely with resilience, because when you get knocked down, you find a way back up. But also, before getting knocked down in the first place, you're still finding a way
not to get knocked down.
Exactly. And so it might work quite nicely, resilient. And I think this is a word that didn't really come on my radar for a long time, but it does tie into the other topic, which was failure, that I was talking about earlier before we met with my students or my mentees. And I wanted to talk about failure because a lot of the time I talk to students about failure, because I feel like when I was at school and even beyond, there was always this, not taboo, but I guess failure was always seen to be a bad thing. And my goal with my students is to encourage failure and celebrate failure, because ultimately, and I ask them this question, usually I say, who do you think fails more, successful people or unsuccessful people? And invariably most say successful people. And I say, why? Well, the unsuccessful person will fail once, twice, 5 times, 10 times and give up. The successful person really only needs to be successful once, and they might have 1,000 failures or 10,000 failures in the case of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. If that story
there's a more famous recent example, which I don't know what the exact quote was, but Michael Jordan said, he missed more baskets than anybody.
Well,
but scored more as well. He had to shoot more to miss more and to practice.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I actually showed them the 2 Nike commercials earlier today. The one on failure and the one which is maybe it's my fault. I don't know if you've seen those two. And I also gave them the example, and you would have heard of this person probably. They hadn't, but have you heard of the baseball player Babe Ruth? You must have.
Yeah, I know Babe Ruth. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I said to them, well, he was the person, I don't know if this stat is still true, but he had the most amount of home runs ever. But he also had the most amount of strikeouts ever as well. So he was.
I can believe that.
In both.
Yeah. And it was home run or out.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that I told them the story of, you might not know who she is, but Sarah Blakely. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you, but she's the founder of a company called Spanx, which is the women's shapewear company. And she was being interviewed on a podcast once. And I remember hearing her tell this story, which I really resonated with. And her company's worth $2 billion. She's sole owner of it. She didn't take any investment and so on. But she said that her and her brother, when they were having dinner with her dad, when they were growing up, would always ask them, what have you failed at today? And if they couldn't come up with something that they'd failed at, he'd be annoyed with them because it meant that they hadn't pushed themselves hard enough in some way. And I say to my students, look, you're all very successful at overcoming failure. And I ask them, and I say, the reason I know this, having just met you, is because I saw you all walking about earlier today, provided I've seen them walking about. And they get confused. And I say, well, look, the average toddler on average fails 17 times an hour when learning to walk, falls down 17 times an hour. And I say, look, imagine Nick, your parent or whoever had said to you when you were growing up, you know what, Nick, you've fallen down 12 times already this hour. You're clearly not getting this walking malarkey. If I was you, I would crawl for the rest of your life. Way easier, less heartache. Luckily, they don't say that. You carry on failing for another 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, and you become very successful at walking. Now, somewhere between the age of 2 and 3 and 14 and 15, we think failure is a bad thing and we do our best to avoid it without realizing that actually failure is your only route to success. And it's not something I really realized, I think, until I started reading lots of autobiographies about 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm sure you're familiar with the whole Carol Dweck fixed mindset, growth mindset stuff.
Yeah.
And I was definitely someone of a more fixed mindset because I think I was told always, oh, you're smart. I did well in certain exams. Oh, you're smart. And so my identity was wrapped up with being smart, but it also meant that I didn't do things that would maybe shatter that identity by pushing myself enough. And we were sharing some examples, and I can share a couple with you, 2 that stick into my mind of failure, where I felt they impacted me for a long time. And the first one was, I think I was probably quite young, about 9 or 10. And I'd done my grade 3 violin. And I didn't really practice my musical instruments. And that was the first one that I got back and I'd failed it. And I remember going up into my bedroom and like crying for like an hour or 2. And then eventually, and I guess this talks about resilience, but eventually, I guess my mum had come and spoke to me and then I wanted to give up the music altogether. And then eventually I did the exam again and passed. And then the other time that I felt, and I think this impacted me a lot in terms of, confidence or wanting to prove myself, is trying to get into my secondary school. There was an entrance exam. And although I'd done all right in the entrance exam, I didn't get a strong enough recommendation from the head teacher. And for whatever reason, I didn't get into that school. I did eventually, and I was on the waiting list, but I remember feeling like a real failure. This is 11 years old, right? So you feel like an absolute failure.
I've got some interesting examples to come back with in a minute, just because they mirror yours, but with slightly different outcomes.
Yeah, and so I think that really affected me, and I guess it was like this, that it was this idea of failing, and I remember it coming up when, like, even when I'm shooting a basketball, and let's say you miss a few shots, and then your teammates don't have faith in you that you're going to make the shots, then suddenly you get into your own head, and then you don't take the shots, and you take the pass instead of taking the shot because you don't want to miss. Without realizing it is about missing, and you have to miss those shots in order to get the shots in. And so I think that just is something that affected me. And the last thing I want to say before you give your examples, and I often put this out, and I like my acronyms, and so I often put an acronym up on the board, and I'll write the word fail, and I tell them, I want you to fail today. Today's your opportunity to fail. and I write the acronym FAIL, and I say it's simply your first or frequent, if you've done it before, attempt in learning. So today is your first attempt at learning these skills, and so you have to fail. That's by definition the word fail.
That's nice.
And that's something I only heard about 6 years ago from somewhere, and I thought, you know what, I like that. I'm going to latch onto that because that resonated so much with me. And I still am afraid to fail sometimes, but a lot less than before. And even I was talking to my friend the other day who was listening to the podcast, and he was giving me some feedback, and it was our first episode that he listened to, so it's not going to be perfect. And I remember saying to him, yeah, okay, it's fine, you can give me the feedback and everything, because I'd much rather get things out there now than wait for things to be perfect.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's my style, right? I'm just jumping straight in and ask for forgiveness, not permission, which doesn't always work. But it's I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things. Because I never realized we had some similarities in what we did and the way we grew up and things we had to do. And B, I don't know what this means for my mindset, but it's a different story. So first things first, I also learned to do the violin. I did do grade 1, didn't get to grade 3. But at my junior school, primary school, I remember being the only child, about 48 kids at the school, village school. And actually, some people that went to that school listen to this. A shout out to Emma. But I was the only kid in that school not to get Child of the Week. So I remember saying to my violin teacher, will you put a word in if I train really, really hard? She's like, yeah. Train really hard all week. He didn't put a word in. I got really upset. So the following week, I said, if I train really hard this week, will you put a word in? So for me now, being really good at school for 2 weeks running was a real effort. This did involve willpower and discipline, right? And resilience for me, because I was not a particularly good kid at school. I used to mess around a lot. Cheeky rather than, anything too untoward, but even so. Did it again, worked really hard, and she missed it. I remember practicing really hard. I remember practicing the song Little Donkey, which I did once play in a local church in Woodford Primary School. It was terrible. But I remember doing this after grade 1, and she didn't give me the sticker. I ended up walking out. I threw the violin on the floor in front of the whole school and said, stuff it, I'm done. And then marched out of the school, right? So that was my mindset at that point. She wasn't going to give it. That was me. My willpower done. I'd quit. As far as I'm concerned, she didn't live up to her end of the bargain. I maintain that, by the way. I understand that she was getting me to practice regularly, but there's a limit. Yeah. And I've gone 1 week, and this was the second. I never did win Child of the Week, by the way, ever in primary school. So that was the first thing, only because you mentioned the violin. Then the school incident, I remember really upsetting my mum. So there's a Bishop's grammar school where I grew up in Salisbury, which is a pretty good boys' school. But all my friends, all the kids I played football with, went to a comprehensive school in Amesbury, which was, so Salisbury was like 3 miles from the house. Amesbury was 8 miles away. But that's where my brother went. Bus picks up from outside. All my mates went that way from my primary school. I just wanted to go to Stonehenge. And also Stonehenge was a mixed school, which was big for me. So I did not want to go to an all-boys school. But mum had set me up for the entrance exam, the 11 plus. So I went. Ironically, my violin teacher ended up, the same violin teacher, we're just thinking about now, drove me to that 11 plus. I don't know, that's another thing.
Maybe she did actually like you and care for you, but okay.
Yeah, this is probably a couple of years on from me quitting violin. She was still at the school. Anyway, Mrs. Bishop, her name was, but she drove me to the example, and I didn't answer a single, I sat there in total abstinence and didn't answer a single thing on the paper. I'm pretty sure I had to go over 2 days, not one. Maybe that's my memory playing tricks on me, but I didn't answer anything. And I remember being at home. My mum, I lived inside a nursery school, which my mum ran, and I remember her getting a phone call saying your son sat it and he hasn't answered a thing, so he hasn't passed. Like, he hasn't even put his name down. And she hit the roof. It's my future. You've jeopardized this. You don't know what you're thinking now at 11. You don't know what you're doing. And I remember being the happiest man in the room, knowing definitely going to the comp. I definitely can't go. Being really happy about it. And then sort of several years later, reflecting, going, probably wasn't the best move. I mean, my grades were fine. I did what I wanted to do, but you look back and go, my mum was probably right. Actually, the grammar school probably would have been quite cool to have gone to for different reasons and whatever, but didn't do those things. I was just thinking your school example of trying harder. Mine was the complete opposite, do less. But I wanted to get to that, for me, that my growth outcome, this thing about growth mindsets or fixed mindset. I wanted to do my own thing, make my own way, and led us to where we are now. But interestingly, when you're talking about the failure piece, so I'll come back. There's a coaching thing which you might know anyway, and we work with this with my clients anyway. Is there's a thing you can do, which is expect the storm. If you know the failure is coming, which is what you're doing with your kids, which is great. Yeah. If you know failure is a possibility, then you can prepare for it. You can accept it. You can plan for it. You can use that discipline you were talking about to potentially overcome it. Okay, if the catastrophize it in theory, hopefully it doesn't happen in practice. But if we catastrophize, what then? How would you feel? And then if that happened, what then? Then how would you feel? And actually, if we have those stories in our mind in that coaching mindset, it can really help us prepare for the worst so we know what actions to take in that particular situation. And I always use an example of with clients. I say, we love ladders, but we're really fearful of snakes. So when you're climbing your career ladder, and I do a lot of career coaching, what's the next rung of ladder you're going to get to? And what happens if you hit a snake? What snakes you need to be mindful of? What snakes could take you back down? How would you react to that? How would you get back on the ladder? Where's the goal or the place you want to get to? What dice are you going to roll to help get there? And there's loads of questions you can work through. I thought it was quite interesting because I think all that links to failure. You know it's coming, there's a possibility, we can plan for it.
I think, where you talked about, knowing it's there, knowing it's coming is really important, because the thing is, that's what isn't appreciated. When I go to schools and I suddenly tell them, you're going to fail, it's okay to fail, you're allowed to fail, it's part of getting to success. And I say, look, you have to visit, right? You have to go on holiday. You just don't have to live there, because they're so afraid of failure. And I don't ever remember being told that it was okay and it was necessary to fail, to learn and to get through things. I mean, I guess you learn some of it, right? You ride a bike, you fall down, you do all that. But at some point, it's the exams, the pressures, all of this. And you suddenly think that there's no margin for failure, without realizing that every successful person has got to that point through failure. And I was saying to the girls, and I don't know how true this is, I think this is true, because I remember hearing some VC talk about it, like a venture capitalist, but he was saying that in Silicon Valley, for example, that they may ask you, right, what other business have you failed at? What business have you launched that's failed? And if you can't come up with a business that you've done that's failed, they won't give you the investment, because they know the failure is coming. And so they don't want it to be with their money. So they want you to have failed before they get your money, before you get their money. And so I think that's just important for people to recognize, is that it's a part of life, right? And I say, whether it's Thomas Edison or Kentucky Fried Chicken guy. So normally I say the KFC guy, Colonel Sanders, right? Retires at 65 years old from the army, has got nothing but this tiny little paycheck and then this little recipe that he's got. So he goes around to all these diners in his state or his borough, try to get them to take the recipe on and give him a commission when they sell the chicken, and then none of them want it. So he goes further afield, and eventually he goes to 500, then he goes to 1,000, and he goes to something like 1,300 different restaurants, and none of them want him. In the end, I think he gets a loan from the bank, starts his own chicken shack up, which becomes KFC, which he sells for a few years later for multiple millions. And I say, look, if he'd given up after 1,000 no's, where would he be, right? If Sylvester Stallone had given up after his first 1,000 no's when it came to the Rocky script, where would he be? And we just forget that, because we always see the tip of the iceberg with people. We see the success point and not all the failures.
Not underneath.
Sure. And I think I just like to reiterate that to people, especially young people, but also adults, because sometimes people make a deal out of a failure, and
we talked. I think it might have been the last episode or one before about fight, flight, or freeze. When I panicked at the Ironman race because my dropout broke on my bike. Those haven't listened to it, go back. But that was, you always say, if you hear a cliche, listen to it. There's something in it. But if you failing to prepare means we're preparing to fail. Right now, I use that word fail because you've used it. That's a cliche we hear a lot. But that was an example there where if I hadn't planned well enough, I didn't have that piece of kit. But there's a Paralympic gold medalist guy called Jonathan Broome Edwards. I've been privileged to meet. I've heard him talk. He's a really great guy. But he won gold at the most recent Olympics. And I know his coach as well, because he's helped me with my coach. It's great, a fantastic coach called Graham Ravenscroft. So shout out if he's listening. In his story, really interestingly, I think it was the last one was Beijing, right? Have I got that right? Beijing Olympics? What the last one?
I can't even. No, I think it was Japan, wasn't it?
Japan. Well, it was somewhere hot. Right? They weren't expecting rain. But in his talk, he said that he prepared for every eventuality and was literally the only one in Olympic Village that bought a rain mat, bought an umbrella, bought all this kit that no one thought they'd ever need. And he was prepared for every possible eventuality. And lo and behold, he did high jump, the day of his high jump, when he won Paralympic gold, it absolutely peed it down. And it was the only one there fully prepared for the conditions. But it meant that, okay, other people can go and get coats, but it throws you off because you're not expecting it. Whereas because he was already expecting, already prepared for it. Yes, they can go and find coats, they can find umbrellas, but it's not what they were expecting. He had expected every eventuality and was able to stay calm in that moment. And thankfully, went and got gold for GB in his jump. But he said it didn't let that derail him. He was watching everyone panicking around like I was in the Ironman race, trying to find a dropout, trying to find a reaction. Well, and there's another cliche, which is vision drives decision. So again, in that moment, he's visioning getting gold medal, right? So in that moment where he's trying to, I know you're very into visualization as I am, and how powerful that can be. But if we create the vision in our mind, and that can drive the decisions that we need to hopefully, not saying failure isn't a possibility, but we can certainly do things that mitigate the risks. You can vision, if you're Michael Jordan, scoring that winning basket in the last possible moment. If we visualize that enough, then we're slightly calmer in the moment. I watched a movie, I don't know if you've seen Air.
Recently, I loved it. Yeah.
Really interesting. I saw it on the plane. A really interesting thing. But in there, the reason they spotted Michael Jordan as being the potential great player he became was because he was so calm as a college 18-year-old, biggest shot in his life, nailed it. And you just wonder, well, how many times did he visualize that moment beforehand? Was that the reason he was calm? That vision driving decision, that planning for failure, being prepared so that he didn't end up failing. I just think all those things kind of comes together, really. I think it was relevant to what you were just
they definitely do, and it's funny you talk about being prepared. Like, so I I think you know anyway, but I was in the scout movement from the age of about 8 to 21. So
yeah,
there's Cubs, Scouts, Venture Scouts, Leader, everything, and their motto is be prepared. And I really hold that dearly. Like I normally give a talk to some of the students about a Duke of Edinburgh hike that I did when I was younger, and this wasn't through the Scouts, but it was through another thing. And essentially, what happened? The story is this: I wake up in the morning and it's 6:30, and the only thing I've got to drink is this warm can of beer, and so the reason that I've got this warm can of beer is it's the second day of the hike, and the first day was really terrible. Like, we got lost, it rained on, soaked, and we didn't realize that we had to find our own supply of water for the 4-day hike. And so we ran out of water, and at the end of the first day, the only water we could find was this green swamp juice, and so there was no way I was going to drink that. And so I had to go to bed hungry, tired, wet, and so on. So the next day, I've got this can of beer, and I'm so thirsty, so I open it. Now, why am I carrying 4 cans of beer at 18 years old on a hike in Wales?
And no water. Very unlike the Harry I know.
Well, this is it. And no water purification tablets or anything. And so I have this swig of beer, and then I want to throw up. And so I say to my friend, I'm going to quit. And he says, look, the guy's coming to inspect the campsite, but he's running late. So just walk with us for a bit, for 15 minutes, and then jump in. After 15 minutes, the guy still doesn't show up. So my friend said, look, he's running late. Just walk another 15 minutes. Then 15 minutes later, the sun comes out, clouds start to part, clothes dry, and even better still, we find this fresh supply of water, and we do the hike very successfully. I learned 3 things through that entire process. The first thing is be prepared. Right, I wasn't prepared for the whole water situation, and as a result, I suffered. Second thing was you can get through difficult things with the support of your friends. And the third thing I learned was that although the rainy days come, the sunshine always follows. And I use those as stories for them. But the main thing is this: be prepared. And so when I go to teach, I often take this massive backpack with me, and the teachers will come in and they'll say, oh, do you want a cup of coffee or tea or this, that, and that? I go, I've got water in there. I've got my herbal tea. I've got my smoothie. And even the other day, there was a kid, bless him, and he had this runny nose or something, and the teacher wouldn't let him go out to go and get a tissue or something. And I was like, yeah, it's all right. I got some tissues there, because when I cycle, I sometimes get a runny nose. So I try and be prepared, and it's something I learned through the Scouts, actually. And even when we were doing our cycle trip once, I remember this, and someone had bust up their cleats on their shoes, and the screws had come out, the little things, which you wouldn't have spares of, right? Maybe you might have spare brake pads or something, but you wouldn't have these spare screws for the cleats to go into, except for I did. I was like, I had those, and I gave them to whoever it was that needed them. And they're like, how have you got that? I was like, I like to try and be prepared as much as
possible. I can give testament to your preparedness, because you've been on cycle tours with me, and you pack half your kitchen. So we've seen it. You do, and everyone is smoothie. The whole lot comes with you. This is Harry's kitchen. The
bread,
very much.
The gluten-free bread, the nuts, the everything.
There's an interesting. I'd say this to Leo, and I'll say it to even my daughter as well, which is you're only ever 6 inches away from success, failure, or achieving anything you want in your life. They never get it. It's like 6 inches is the space between your ears, right? So just think about what you need to do, and if you think carefully and you prepare properly, or you want to achieve something, use that 6 inches between your ears to work it out. And if you think in that way, I'm only ever 6 inches away from achieving whatever I want. That just brings it back to self. But interesting, I want to take it just before we finish on willpower, because I've got a great example. It's very rare I get to speak about my brother, because we're a close family, but I don't see a lot of my brother. But interestingly, in terms of willpower and resilience, I think it's a relevant example, so I'll bring it up. So my brother was in a really bad motorbike accident that severed 7 nerves from his spinal cord. So he lost use of his right eye. He was right-handed, aircraft mechanic, and he'll probably tell me off because I've got the exact titles wrong, but worked on Chnooks and aeroplanes and things like that. And as a mechanic, he obviously very using with your hands, but he lost the full. He was right-handed, the full use of his right hand, and he's now actually had it amputated. But that was many years later. But since then, watching my brother now, so he still mountain bikes. He's fully left-handed. He brought up his children. He's changing nappies with a single left hand. He still rides motorbikes, drives, still works in the aircraft industry, and is still incredibly like he was. It was my dad was telling me, rightly or wrongly, he was putting up scaffolding the other day with one arm, climbing up. Like the resilience and the willpower and the expertise that where we can retrain our brains to overcome whatever the odds are, particularly when we don't always have a choice. So we talked about willpower. I mean, I guess there was a choice here to give up.
There is a choice because you can give up. Yeah.
He didn't though. And for someone I don't see a lot of, but there's a huge amount of respect. Only because he's, there's respect for lots of people. He's obviously not alone in this, but because he's so close to me, to watch someone completely have to relearn and not let him stop the things he loved doing, like mountain biking. He still does like the I wouldn't dare do the trail levels that he does. And he's doing it all with one arm. He's just moved all the gears, which again, he's done, moved all the gears to one side of the bike, does all the jumps, does it all with one arm. It's like absolutely crazy, but it does really show you, and me personally, because I've seen it, how much we can achieve when we use those 6 inches between our ears and we engage our willpower, and we engage our resilience, and we just rethink what's possible.
And the adaptability and resourcefulness of the human condition. Your brother's story reminds me of the story I heard, and I think it was this guy. He was in like some kind of horrific plane crash and ended up being like disfigured, and then had some other accident, ended up being in a wheelchair. And when asked about all the things he now can't do, he said, well, before I could do 10 million things, let's say, and now I can do 9,900,090. Yeah. So I can still do tons of things. And I guess it's all about reframing, and it's really hard to do because something quite challenging happens to you. But if you can reframe it, and again, it goes back to nothing has any meaning except for the meaning you give it. If you choose that it means that I'm going to be more resourceful, more adaptable and resilient, then that's what you're going to be. If you're going to choose that worries me and let me give up, then that will be you as well. But actually, interestingly, when you're talking about the 6 inches thing, it's quite funny. You said you're only 6 inches away from success or failure. I actually thought you were going to go somewhere else with it. And there's a picture, you might have seen it, where there's 2 miners who are digging for gold. And
I think I have. Tell me.
It's a great, they're 2, one above the other. And this is back in the old days in the old West. And they've got their pitchforks and they're going for gold. And you see one of them just striking gold, but then the other one just giving up and walking away. Whereas if he had just carried on pitching a couple more times, he would have got there. And
reminds you of The Detectorists when I watched that. Great comedy where they just... Which one? The Detectorists.
The Detectorists.
It's a British dry comedy. It's brilliant about 2 guys that just love doing metal detecting. And they just missed the fortune. Honestly, it's way better than it sounds. But it's a similar kind of thing. They just missed it. They just dug a little longer.
But it's hard to know, though, because it is hard to know, because you could keep going and going and going and going, and then they're not...
And still never find it.
Yeah. And so it's easy when you see it, step back and you see it, but you can't see it. And again, I was showing...
That ticks into the willpower thing, is you keep going because you think you hope there's a reward at the end, right? That's where does your willpower give up when you're really pushing into big...
This is why I do think willpower is a bit dangerous, because I feel like it's only a catalyst and it can only get you so far. So if I needed to rely on willpower to do the things I do as opposed to habit and routine, I wouldn't be doing them, because after 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever it might be, it's going to go. If I relied on willpower to always eat well, this is what I say to people is if you rely on willpower to eat a healthy breakfast and then rely on willpower to eat a healthy lunch, by the time you get to dinner, you're done. Right?
Yeah. That's why most arts don't work. They evolve too much willpower.
They evolve too much willpower.
Don't enjoy it enough.
And whereas if you just had a routine, this is what when we talk about food at some point, we'll talk about front loading in a bit more detail. But what I do is front loading. So I front load my nutrition at the beginning of the day. So if I make that smoothie like I did earlier, then I somewhat have an okay lunch. Then by dinner, if it's not going to be so good, which it might not be sometimes, because I'm like everybody else, I might come back and just go into Just Eat and order some takeaway. At least I've done the good stuff in the day. Whereas if I had to use willpower the whole time, I would definitely be out.
Interestingly, we actually agree on this because I front load as well. That's why I always try and get my exercise done in the morning, because the longer the day goes, the more the willpower gets challenged, right? I think, I've got this to do and I'm a bit tired now, and I've got same with my nutrition. I front load all my nutrition. Exactly.
Well, I did this yesterday. So yesterday, Sunday, right? I wake up and it's quite sunny, so I decided to go outside in the garden. I actually start off quite well. I do a bit of meditation out in the garden, bit of natural sunlight, and I think, right, Sundays often I go for a little mountain bike around Trent Park, which is near me, and I can't remember what happened, but I got caught up with something online. Really bad idea. I decided to check something, and it ended up spiraling. And then the next thing I know, it's 1 in the afternoon or something, and I'm getting a bit hungry, and then it's 2, and then I just don't do it. And I actually didn't even leave the house yesterday, except for to cut the grass, which is actually in the garden, so it's not really that.
That definitely links to some willpower. I thought interesting. I wanted to come back to something because it popped into my head, and I thought it was really interesting when I heard it. And it linked to something we always seem to come full circle to this, because we have similar views, which is, we term it slightly differently, but you always say nothing means anything to the minute you give it. And I'm a big believer in your thoughts control your feelings, and the thinking, not the thought. And it's a similar kind of concepts, really, just worded differently. But interestingly, I was listening to a story, and I can't think who it was by. It may have been Simon Ong, because I've just read him, and I'm not very good at connecting where these things come from, but it's not mine. But it was really interesting. And it made me think about our last episode where we talked about when you're grateful for something. I know you're a big believer in gratitude, though. It's hard to be unhappy and grateful at the same time. And you mentioned a minute ago about putting things into perspective a little bit. So in this particular example, it was interesting. He'd gone on a tour, so he had the willpower to go and do, I think it was Simon On, goes and does this big trek. It may have been in Nepal or Everspace Camp or something like that. And he had the tour guide with him. And he was talking about the willpower he had to keep going to get to the top of the mountain and all this kind of stuff. And it was obviously difficult and whatever. But the tour guide had nothing but loads of energy. I think it must have been Simon On, just talking about energy. And loads of energy for doing these tours, and he had hardly any, pretty much barefooted doing these things. And he said, what are you doing all this for? What is it that keeps you going to do these tours and these conditions? And we've got all of our kit. And he said, I'm desperate. All I want to do in my life, my big goal is one day I want to own a pair of Nike Air Max trainers. And he was like, okay, so I'm saving up to do that. I've always wanted to have a pair of these Nike Air Maxes. I said, okay. So anyway, they do the trip, and at the end, they all give tips. They all give the tips. And the guy that I think it was Simon, let's assume it is, Simon was on this trip. He decides at the end to give him, he had a pair of Nike trainers that he hadn't worn or whatever, and he decided to give the tour guide a tip and his shoes. And the two things happened. One is that obviously the tour guide was ecstatic, like it meant to him way more than anything else. But the other thing I thought was really interesting was when you think about gratitude, the impact it had on Simon, who gave the shoes away, was it reminded him that we're often talking about this with, and I bring it back to failure. We're thinking we're not succeeding in something. I feel like a failure because I can't get off the sofa and go for a run or whatever. But it reminded us of the things that we should be grateful for. And you mentioned the plane. That's where it came from. You talked about the guy in the plane crash who said, it used to be 10 million things, like 9,990,000. But in this instance, in terms of gratitude, he looked down and went, I've never really stood and thought whether or not I should be grateful for the fact that I can A, wear trainers, and B, that I can afford Nike shoes. That's just not in my periphery of the things I'm typically writing in my gratitude diary, the things that I'm grateful for, until you meet someone that can't access those things. Yeah. And for them, we take those things completely, at least solely for granted, which is a bit of a pun, not meant to be, but completely for granted. And in his instance, like, wow, like this took me just a moment just to reflect and just be grateful that I've got shoes, that I can go and buy myself a replacement pair of Nike Air Max trainers or any trainers for that matter. And I'll go home from this tour and I can leave a tip. And looking at the other side, he'd been working tirelessly on these multiple tours just to afford the one thing he took for granted. Just thought it was a really interesting, it linked to your aircraft crash situation and things we're grateful for. And being happy when we understand.
Actually, I remember I gave my tour guide as well on Everest my sleeping bag in the end, because I bought a warmer sleeping bag. I gave him mine because he wasn't even using a sleeping bag. But I remember the first time that I really felt grateful for just this. I don't know if it was the first time, but I remember it was in actually where they make a lot of Nikes in Vietnam, and I was in Vietnam in 2000, and I went to a bunch of the museums that they've got there where they have really horrific actual jars with children who are now deceased but were born as a result of birth defects because of the Agent Orange that was sprayed during the Vietnam War made by Monsanto, who make weed killer at the moment. But they sprayed this Agent Orange, and all these kids with deformities, and a lot of them lived, but they had these deformities. And I remember seeing this guy, and he was traveling on a skateboard, but the way he was traveling on a skateboard, because he had like one arm and maybe one leg, and so he was on his body on the skateboard, just, you know, strolling around. And I remember thinking, Jesus, like, I'm there, like, and suddenly I was grateful for everything, right? The education I had, the list, that
sure,
2 legs and everything, and I still have that image in my head a lot of the time when I think about what I could be ungrateful for. And that's not to say that sometimes we feel miserable and we feel like we haven't got what we want in life, and that's fine, and we can feel like that. And at the same time, we can also think how grateful we are for the air that we're currently breathing, or the wind on my face, or
sure.
Yesterday I was grateful for being barefoot on the grass for the first time in ages, having the sun on my face while I was outside. And it's sometimes only when you really see how many hardships there are from other people, like trying to work all hours of the day just to get some Nike Air trainers, that you really appreciate how much we do have. The fact that anyone who's listening to this is actually listening to this.
For sure. I think it's interesting that I spoke to my dad about this. And obviously, for those that have listened to other episodes will know that he's got terminal cancer, right? Which is difficult. And you end up grateful then for any moment you can get or conversation you can have. And suddenly that they're a lot more apparent than they would have been if he'd not been sick. If he wasn't unwell, I wouldn't be taking those moments as I wouldn't be so grateful for the moments that I've now got, right? Which is a way of reframing and understanding that when something's potentially going to be taken away from you, you suddenly appreciate it that little bit more. Yeah. But interestingly, it's like when you're well, like you and I hopefully are, as far as we're aware, we have lots of goals, expectations, wishes, and dreams. But when you're ill, you've only got one.
Yeah,
and that's when it gets crystallized. You know, I said to my dad, like, the only thing you really you want for yourself, and of course he wants things for others, wants his family to be healthy. But I think for him, his personal thing, he wants to be well. He wants to be well. That's what, if you're unwell, that's the one thing you want. All the other wishes become immaterial because innately we want to survive and live and move forward. But if you and I are living well, all we want to do, we have all these goals and this, that, and the other. It's just, it does bring it home a little bit.
This is the reason why actually I do what I do. And I say to people, and I've been saying this since I started with the whole leadership beat model and the health and wellness, is that I recognize really early on, especially when I started contracting, that it doesn't matter if you've got the best strategies or goal setting techniques or anything in the world. Because if you're not well, if you're not healthy, if you're not energized, which everything I talk about is energy, and you just be reading about Simon Ong and his energy stuff. If you don't have the energy, the vitality to get up and do those things, and you haven't got the health, then what difference does it make if you know all the goal setting strategies in the world and the strategies in the world? And health is our greatest wealth. Again, cliche, but they say knowledge is power, but really it's potential power. And actually the difference is not really to have the knowledge, it's to have the wisdom, and which is to know what to do with the knowledge that you've got in the first place. And I say to people, knowing what to do and doing what you know are two different things. And if you know what to do but you don't do it, then you probably don't really know it.
Yeah, more for you. So I'm conscious of time. Of another day, if we ever open up a conversation on entrepreneurialism, I will be happy to talk about the fact that I'm definitely an entrepreneur who has failed. 2012 in particular. So we can talk about that another time. So and interesting, I did get my investment for my business through an investor. So I've been through that experience as well.
Maybe that I think that'd be useful for both me and our listeners to hear about. And I think learning about specific failures is not talked about enough, because sometimes we latch onto the success, which is fine, but actually the failures are the thing that help you build to that success, and that's useful for people to hear as well.
Well, I'll tell you what, a good way to finish might be thanks to Emma Wynn, who sent me the Man's Search for Meaning book. But I did write down a quote from Nietzsche that he actually, so it's not his, not Frankel's every time he writes the book, but he quotes him in there, but it's relevant. And he says, "He who has a why to live by can bear with almost any how." Well, that's pretty hard to write that down. Pretty powerful stuff. So kind of links to what we've been talking about in terms of failure and
your purpose. What's the reason you're doing the thing you're doing, and that's going to get you through. And you can suffer through anything if you've got a strong enough why.
Well, look, last thing I want to mention before we go, actually, just remind the listeners, because we're getting loads in and we haven't asked for them, but we actually encourage you to send us more. So if you've got questions, if you want us to, any feedback, anything you can do to help us improve the show, or if you just want to make a comment, or most importantly for us, and the reasons our why and our purpose for doing it is hopefully to have an impact on just one person, ideally each episode, and take something away, utilize it, implement it, change the way they're thinking, change their feelings, whatever it might be. If that's happened for you, please let us know. Catch us on WhatsApp, drop us an email. I'll put our details are in the show notes. And then for us in return, we would love it if you could just share the episode with one person, colleague, friend, relation, anyone, any episode. If you think it might help them, please do share the show. We can obviously continue to build our community while we go about recording these episodes.
Yeah, we would really appreciate that. Just pick an episode that really resonates with you, that you feel like you've got a friend that needs to hear it, and send it their way.
Super. Harry, always a pleasure. In 2 weeks, it's good to catch up. Sorry, hopefully next time I'll have a little bit more, less jet lag, a little bit more energy to bring to the show.
Well, it'll be another 7 days, so you should have got back into it by then.
I'm feeling energized. I think you brought the energy. You've given me some energy from the show, so I appreciate you. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, take care. We'll see you next time.
Take care, buddy. Cheers. Thank you for tuning in to the Mindful Past podcast with Nick Day and Hari Kalymnios.
We hope you found our discussion insightful and gained valuable takeaways to support you on your journey.
Please do leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform and share an episode that's resonated with you with a friend or a family member who you think may also find it valuable.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to ensure you never miss a future episode.
In the meantime,
we'll continue exploring mindful path topics to provide you with more insights and ideas to support your personal growth.
For now, thank you for your support, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode of the Mindful Path podcast real soon.